just foggy days, but now you're here and the sky is clear. You're the one who always treats me right. You're the one who takes care of me. I've been lifted up by you. I've been lifted up by you. I've been lifted up by you.
Welcome, guys. Welcome to the Brand Identity Design Business Podcast. My name is Jason. I am your host, and we are live streaming on LinkedIn. I tried doing a live stream even on Clubhouse, but I think with all the hiccups and changes they have made to the user interface, it really sucks. So I'm going to exit out from Clubhouse and just do LinkedIn because LinkedIn rules when it comes to audio, and it's kick ass. I want to thank each and every one here because, as you may know or you may not know, I'm not really sure. Jan 22nd, 2022 is when I started doing podcasts. I started doing podcasts because I could not speak properly to people. I could not find clients. I could not do any sort of business. And podcasts enable me to find new guests, interesting people, talk to them, share ideas, build a nice network of interesting people to be surrounded with. So I finished almost 2 years, this Monday on Jan 22nd of 2024. I've completed around 120 episodes. I have created around 8,000 minutes of audio content related to entrepreneurship. I started with the intent just to open up myself. Now I'm so comfortable in my own skin and I love what I do. And I am so keen on finding new people, interesting topics to discuss about. So I want to thank each and every listener out there, supporters and advocates who have been supporting my show. Special thanks to Leslie, who you see down in the audience. She is been a big time supporter of my show from the very, very beginning. Thank you so much for your love and kindness, Leslie, who is down there. And I want to start off, today's episode is going to be very, very interesting because we would delve into the intricacies of handling common mistakes in conflict and reputation management. The person who you see next to me, Susannah Margison, is a seasoned expert in this field, and she shares her insights on pitfalls many of us encounter. She provides valuable strategies for overcoming such challenges, from misconception about reputation to errors in conflict resolution. We are gonna try exploring everything under the book as much as we can in this specific episode. This episode is tailored towards any professionals in conflict and reputation management, or any business leaders or individuals seeking effective strategies for navigating through these challenges. Susannah Margison, she's a crisis management coach. She's double IPEX certified on leadership and transition dynamics. She also assists millennials and Gen Z CEOs, leaders, and high achievers in leveling up during a crisis. She's based out in Ontario, Canada. She also helps clients across the world, not limiting herself just to Canada. Before transitioning into coaching, Susannah was a trial lawyer for 10 years, resolving hundreds of disputes and working with high profile clients. Susannah, I want to quickly give a shout out. Welcome to the podcast. Let's make some virtual noise, guys. Let's welcome Susannah.
Thank you. Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So incredible to have you. And my first question, to start off, Susannah, why did you leave this trial lawyer job? Why did you become a coach? Not that it's a bad thing. I just want to understand, like, what motivated you to transition from the successful 10-year career as a trial lawyer to becoming a crisis management coach? And could you maybe share some pivotal moments or factors that influence you to do this career switch?
Absolutely. So this is actually a question that I continue to ask myself because I get asked the question all the time and I never feel like my answer really measures up. So the honest human answer is that I was sitting at my computer very early on in the pandemic, feeling very, very stressed in my job as a lawyer. And I had my now husband is a frontline worker, and I was thinking to myself, if he got COVID and passed away, what would that look like? Which is a horrible thing to have to think. And then I also had to think to myself, what if I got COVID tomorrow and was struck down? And the question that popped in my brain was, if that happened to me, how would I feel about the way I've spent my day today? And would I have wanted to spend my day doing what I'm doing right now? And the answer at that time was a resounding no. But as is the case with a lot of life's pivotal moments, they kind of hit you and then they go away for a little bit. And so I revisited that question a few months later, and I was out walking again with my husband, and I remember saying, I want to help people. I got into law to help people. I feel like there's more I could do, because what I was doing was litigation and going to court, going to trial, going to arbitration at times. And that was one very narrow way to resolve people's problems. And I was also really inspired by TV shows like the show Scandal. And I saw the way that they were using law differently to help people. And I just said to my husband, I think I need to do law differently. And he asked me what I thought I needed to do to make that happen. And as this knee-jerk reaction, I just said, I have a feeling I need to get a coaching certification. And I had not been coached before. I'll be honest, because I know, Jason, you and I were talking before this, and you were saying, is it kind of a step down to become a coach? And I really I didn't really know what it would look like. I just felt like it was the right thing to do. When I went into the coaching certification, I found the one that I thought was going to be the most rigorous and, the most intense and teach me the most. And I just had no idea the impact that coaching could make with people. And I began to love it. I began to see that I could use that legal training to sniff out issues that were showing up in people's lives. And I really loved that it empowered people to make their own decisions. So I would bring my expertise to the table, I'd bring my experience to the table, but then the question is always to the client, you know more about this than I do because you're living this reality, not me. And so what do you make of all of this? And what more information do we need to grab? And it became less about ego and more about collaborating. And what I have seen, this is my third year doing this full time now. And by the way, congratulations on your podcast anniversary. But what I have seen in doing this now for almost 3 years, or for starting my third year, is the changes that my clients experience through the work that I now do with them. First of all, they're happier, but they're so profound. And I feel like my idea with going to law school was I wanted to help people when their integrity was called under question. I wanted to help people when they were in trouble. And I feel like I'm doing that now in a way more powerful way than I ever was able to do that as a straightforward litigator. And it's just, I think it's a really cool way to help people solve their issues. And the niche of conflict and reputation management is so fascinating to me. I've never been more interested in reading about it. And I say I nerd out on the subject because I really do. And it's been probably one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done, and one of the most challenging things I've ever done too.
Well, I'm really glad that you were able to figure out what you wanted to do eventually with your time and make it quality, and you were able to find purpose and meaning in coaching. And coaching, I think people undervalue coaching a lot, but I think it helps a lot of people, as you correctly said. If you have substance in what you offer, and if there is value in what you bring to the table, you can help infinite amount of people with what you do. So Susanna, we are going to be exploring this further, and I'm going to be deep diving into this topic of discussion, which is navigating common mistakes in conflict and reputation management. I have divided the interview into two segments. First, we will focus on conflict, and then we will focus on reputation. My first question to you, for people who might be new to this whole concept, how do you define conflict in the context of professional and personal relationship? And see if you can give us simple examples, so that people can process and understand this.
Sure. Well, when I first thought about conflict, my brain immediately went to lawsuits or people arguing with each other or fighting with each other. And the more I explored the topic, I started to stumble across definitions which were better. And so my favorite definition of conflict is it's an internal experience. It's a dynamic that arises between people when they experience negative emotions because of a perceived disagreement. So a conflict might be more overt. So for example, someone might yell at you and then there's a problem, you guys disagree about something and you're in a bit of a fight. But conflict can also be quite covert and can be quiet, and it can be something that someone's experiencing without telling anybody about it. And so some of my clients will experience a disagreement with somebody and go straight into an antagonistic sort of fight response. And then some, which doesn't always serve them well. And then other clients I have will just shut down when conflict happens, or they go into a people pleasing mode, or they will overcompensate or over apologize or just try to avoid it completely. And so what I realized as I dug into this more was that this is something that shows up daily for people. There's a stat out there which says that people negotiate 3 to 7 times a day, might even be 4 to 7 times a day. And negotiation is what we do when we're in conflict. And so this shows up for people every single day. And it was something that I was noticing even in myself that I didn't necessarily react very well to. It was different when I had to advocate for somebody else. But when it was me, when it was my ego that was coming into question or playing a role in this, it was different. And I it was really fascinating. So I think of conflict as being a subjective experience. It's often a negative experience. It doesn't have to be. And often it's an experience of feeling like we're under threat because one of two things, or sometimes both, have gone out the window. You feel like someone doesn't respect you, or you feel like your goal isn't going to be met. Crucial Conversations, which is a wonderful resource when it comes to dealing with conflict, talks about mutual purpose and mutual respect being the two common or most common triggers of people getting into this state of conflict. And I think that has absolutely, I think it's correct, and it's shown up for me time and time again in my work.
Wow, I had no idea conflict would have so many things at depth. So it's a
Yeah.
subjective experience, as you said, and it's mostly a feeling, a negative feeling due to a disagreement. It can
Yes.
be your boss, it can be, uh, you know, your partner, it could be anyone, for a matter of fact. Wow.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even so, one example that I give to people is I talk about what I have conceptualized for myself as the conflict pathway. And I think if you dug around online, you would probably find lots of different variations of this. And one thing I'll say, Jason, is I don't profess to be the expert in this. I'm somebody who has a lot of lived experience. I've done a lot of research and I've got a lot of professional experience, but I always like to leave the door open to the idea that other people also have really great things to bring to the table. And so I've conceptualized this conflict pathway in my brain and how it works. And I'll use driving as an example because I used to have not so wonderful road rage. So let's say you're driving and someone cuts you off. That is an external trigger that can set off this conflict pathway. That's the first step. And then the next thing that happens is we create a thought about the situation. And the thought could be a judgment, it could be a perception, it could be an assumption, an interpretation. For any lawyers in the crowd, they're probably starting to think back to writing the LSAT, but we think a thought about the situation. We tell ourselves a story about the situation. So if someone cuts me off, I might tell myself a story about that person is a real asshole and they don't think about anybody else on the road and how dangerous and what a selfish person, we as humans, we can really, those stories can grow legs. Like the train leaves the station. And as a result of that story and those thoughts, I'll feel an emotion. And given the example, I'm going to just say it rage, right? I'll feel angry or upset. And then very quickly, I'll form an intention of what I want to do about it. So I might say to myself, I want that person to know that they did something dangerous. I want them to know that I'm upset at them. and then I'll act on it. So I might lean on my horn for a long time and be really aggressive, through it. And does it achieve anything? Not really. But that kind of response, that relationship between the trigger and the action and how it shows up, it can happen in a split second. And so one of the things that has profoundly changed not only my life, but also the lives of my clients is just understanding how that pathway works internally. And then what we want to do is we want to interrupt that pathway before we get to the point where we're acting, and maybe acting in a way that doesn't complement our personal brand or our reputation or our goal for the situation. And that's what I find so cool about conflict, is that it's something that impacts every single one of us. We all go through a similar brain journey with it. And if you can interrupt that, and if you can turn conflict from something that is kind of scary and a bit risky into an opportunity, a chance to understand ourselves and understand other people, then that becomes really powerful. And I sometimes call it a superpower for people who can do that.
I appreciate you explaining some triggers and source of these such conflicts. In the same example of this road rage,
Yeah.
if this client were to approach you, how would you deal with it in that case?
So there's a few ways that I would deal with it with clients. I have some tools that I can work on with them. If we're noticing that they're constantly getting triggered, then there are some conversational coaching tools that we can use that will help neutralize that trigger. But one of the things that I will say, and one of the things that comes up, particularly with people who are a bit ragey with conflict, is they'll say to me, they'll say, you know what, Susannah, I'm not the problem. My partner is the problem, or my boss is the problem, or those drivers are the problem. And so the first thing we have to do is we have to create some awareness about how much power the client actually has in that circumstance. Because just because we're feeling a feeling doesn't mean that the feeling is actually justified. Like, feelings are not facts. And just because we have the feeling doesn't mean we have to act out on them. So, one of the first things I do with my clients is I generate an awareness with them of what their individual conflict tendency is. And to do that, I use an assessment that IPEC actually taught me how to use, called the Energy Leadership Index assessment, which basically will give us a good idea of what your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions look like when things are going well, and what they look like when things are not going well. And your thoughts, emotions, and actions, kind of the relationship between the three, the way you view the world, your attitude towards other people, will contribute to the energy that you're bringing to the situation. And then in turn, what happens is people will pick up on that energy and they'll respond to that energy. So by generating that awareness with my clients of how they show up, then they can start to make some decisions about whether they're showing up deliberately. Because sometimes, and I am a big believer that there's no response that's always going to be correct for every single situation. Like, every single situation is going to have nuances. It's going to have different aspects of it that are going to require us to use our judgment. But what I don't want is, I don't want clients acting by default and then getting themselves in trouble. I would love to create a situation for them where they can be deliberate and purposeful about how they're responding. So there are times when you do need to be a little bit more forceful. If somebody is coming at me on the street, let's say, actually, let me use this example. If I see a coyote, right now, Toronto, at least my neighborhood, is having issues with coyotes. And so they sent out a document, at school, saying this is what you do if you see a coyote. And one of the things they tell you not to do, if I've read the document correctly, is run away. They say you need to be big and you need to kind of make noise and almost establish dominance. And so if I see a coyote, I'm certainly not going to go running away from it. Well, actually, I might. I'm not going to lie. I don't know if I trust that document, but I'm not going to negotiate with the coyote, right? Like, and certainly if I see a bear, I'm going to get out of there, or I'm going to try to fight, because that's what's necessary in the moment. But where people really get into trouble is when they go through that conflict pathway so fast that they end up reacting, and then they hurt other people's feelings, or they hurt their reputations. And for a while, I was in that boat where I just had no concept of the fact that I could navigate these emotions and regulate my emotions. And just, I had no idea that just because I had an emotion, that didn't necessarily mean that I was right to feel that emotion. I didn't have that concept of feelings not being facts. And so that showed up in my behavior, that showed up in my energy. But as soon as I became aware of that, suddenly I was able to decide to make some changes. And so with my clients, with that awareness, what we then end up doing is we then end up saying, okay, who do you want to be in the world? What kind of a person do you want to be? How do you want to be thought of by other people? If we're talking about, employment, we'll talk about what would you want someone to say about you in a reference letter. A question I often ask young leaders in particular is, what do you want the people who work with you to say about you when they're out for after work drinks or what have you? Like, I'll ask some of these questions, these real life questions, because that's where we start to think about, okay, what is the personal or professional brand this person wants to have? And then from there, we can reverse engineer and say, okay, well, this is how we're going to have to act in these circumstances. And in order for us to act that way, how do we need to feel? Okay, and if we want to feel, calm, for example, well, then how are we going to need to think about the situation? And that's where you can start actually being deliberate about, okay, I have this perception. I've decided this person is a jerk, and I'm emoting to that. I'm feeling that. What's a different way I could look at this so that I could feel calm? And that's where we start to slow things down. And then that helps people generate that awareness. So in the moment, they can pick up on when they've been triggered, and they can use the tools that I'll teach them in our work together, calm their emotions or chill their nervous system. And then from there, from a place of being calm, they can make a deliberate decision of how they want to show up and what they want to do about the situation.
I think this is super cool, Susanna. So you're basically trying to help people navigate this pathway in a much more calm and composed manner so that they can take uh, good decisions as to how to handle it. So
Exactly.
so that is super cool. That is freaking cool. I
Thank
remember
you.
I remember going through some of your posts on your website, and I found this interesting thing which you had mentioned. It states conflict isn't just a legal issue; it's a people's issue, and I think you have addressed a lot about it. Would you like to expand on that?
Sure. So one of the things about the law is that when people would come to me, and actually, like, full disclosure, two of my previous colleagues are listening right now. Hi guys, thank you for coming. And so they might be nodding their heads because they've known me in my past life when we were working together on litigation. And so when I was working with these colleagues on litigation, we would get a case, and I say we because it's very much a team effort. It's not just a lawyer. So we would work together on it, and we would only have one way to really go about resolving it. We take it down the line of the litigation, either towards trial or arbitration. And sometimes we can resolve it, usually for an amount of money, because we were working a lot with insurance companies. And then sometimes you can't. And if you can't, then you go to the arbitration. But there's always somebody who feels like they've won, and always somebody who feels like they've lost. And even in litigation, when we would mediate or when we would try to resolve it without going to arbitration, there's usually an element of compromise there, which means everybody is equally unhappy. And what I found interesting is when I zoomed out and kind of looked at situations with a bit more of a big picture lens, I saw there was a lot more to it than just, what does the law say about this? And how is this going to play in court? And there's this whole human emotional side of it that, as a lawyer, I wasn't necessarily trained to manage. There was also the public relations side of it, which is, how is this going to look? And then there are other creative ways that you can resolve problems, because sometimes people don't necessarily want money, they want change. And so we kind of could miss opportunities to create good in the world by just focusing on the legalities. And so I think often, and I think about this in terms of the cases being, in our case, there were two types. There were some cases where you have to start a lawsuit to kind of move things along, and especially in the insurance world, that does tend to be the case a lot of times, where you need to kind of keep things going, and there are time limits, and you have to make sure that you've covered yourself in terms of making sure you have court available to you. So there were some cases that had to be litigated. There were other cases that showed up because the human dynamics were mismanaged. And so if we look at the human dynamics, then a lot of these lawsuits that do end up going to court or do end up escalating can actually be avoided. So I think conflict begins from an intrapersonal, like your self experience of it, and then it shows up with the interpersonal with other people. And that's where it starts first. It's very much a people problem. The litigation is more of a symptom or a side effect of it.
Wow. I'm just blown away with the amount of information and knowledge you have just about conflict. This is
Oh,
super
thanks.
this is super crazy. This is super crazy. Okay, so now that kind of, brings me to this dilemma which I have in my brain, and I think you have also posted something around the same thing. Do you think all conflicts are toxic in nature?
No, 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 not at all. So first of all, there's this really great book. My copy is from 2011, but I still think it's wonderful. And it is called Developing Your Conflict Competence. And they actually divide conflict into five different categories. And the first, I believe that conflict is healthy. I believe it's necessary. I believe that conflict can be a really good way of resolving problems, right? Because other if we don't have conflict, then change doesn't happen and positive change doesn't happen. And when I work with businesses, I'll say to them, one of the best ways you can build your relationships with people, and a reputation is a relationship between one and many, right? So it's all relationships. One of the best ways you can build your relationships is by showing up in a respectful way and exceeding expectations when there's a perceived disagreement. And it really creates safety when someone psychological safety when someone's willing to work through that. So I think conflict can be incredibly productive. It's so important when it comes for us all living together as human beings in this society and on this planet. It can be great. When it becomes toxic, it tends to be when we lose mutual respect and mutual purpose from that crucial conversations framework. And that's when people start telling themselves stories about the other side. That's when people start kind of overreacting. And sometimes there isn't a mutual purpose. Sometimes people don't want what's best for everybody. So, to go back to those five categories, and I'm Canadian, so I'm going to use hockey as my example here to explain this. But the way the book Developing Your Conflict Competence explains it is almost like categories of a hurricane. So category 1 is not so bad compared to category 5. So your category 1 conflict is going to just be differences. So let's say, Jason, you and I are sitting down and we're talking about hockey, and one of the classic rivalries here in Canada is between the Montreal Canadiens and the Toronto Maple Leafs. So let's say you like the Montreal Canadiens and I like the Toronto Maple Leafs. The category 1 level of conflict would just be differences. So if we were to have a difference, I would say, oh, that's cool. Jason likes the Habs, which is the nickname for the Montreal Canadiens. I like the Leafs. That would be really interesting one day if we watch the game together. That could be kind of fun, right? That's that. There's no harm to the relationship. It's fine. The next level, category 2, is a misunderstanding. So in the hockey example, I might say to you, well, hang on a minute. And I don't really know it very much about where the hockey teams are standing right now. So I'm totally just going to riff on this example, but I don't know how the Leafs and Habs are really doing compared to each other. I'm just going to say that. So let's say I'm like, but Jason, the Leafs are so much better. They've got better coaching and blah, blah, blah. And you say, no, 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 Susannah, I like the Habs because they brought in a new coach and their stats are so much better. And then I'm like, oh, okay. So maybe that might change my opinion about the Habs because I've misunderstood I've got the wrong premise for liking the Leafs. Another way misunderstandings show up in the workplace are things like calendar invites, right? Like if someone, misses a client meeting because someone's misunderstood what time they're supposed to show up and where, that can certainly cause some negative emotional discomfort, but it can also be resolved by getting back to common ground, getting back to the same understanding and then moving on. Where misunderstandings become a problem is when they become a pattern of behavior and or when there's a bad outcome to the misunderstanding. So those can be a little bit tricky, but it's a category 2 conflict. The next category up is a disagreement. And that's where things are starting to get a little bit more heated. So you might say, I like the Habs. I might say, well, I like the Leafs. that might be we might feel very strongly about that. We might have different values as to why we like each of them. And maybe you and I have to agree to disagree and just say, you know what? That topic is off the table. We're never going to be able to talk about that. We're never going to be able to coexist on that topic. So that has now become a disagreement, and we're going to park it, and we're just not going to talk about it because it'll escalate. The next level, category 4, is when we start to get into discord. And that's where the relationship between the two parties or the people involved starts to deteriorate. So it becomes not just about, you like the Habs, I like the Leafs. It becomes, well, what does that say about you as a person? Like I can't respect you as a person. And it gets a little bit more heated. And then level 5, category 5, is polarization. And this day and age, we all know what polarization is. It's, we're on two different extremes and we're really angry about it and we're acting out about it. And it's just things have really escalated. And what we sort of look at when we look at discord and polarization, when we see those two, that's when we sort of say, you know what, it's going to become difficult for people to resolve this without some help. Particularly with polarization, it can be very hard, and I think it is very hard to bring people back from polarization, and the skills and techniques that you need to do that are very different than what we might do with discord, or even trying to get people to resolve disagreements. It is a different skill set for every single type of conflict. But the first two, misunderstandings and differences, I think having differences is can be very healthy in a society. I think that they should be celebrated, and so that's not a bad thing, and that's not necessarily toxic at all.
I love these 5 categories. I think it's pretty educational. Differences, misunderstanding, disagreement, discord, and
Yep,
polarization.
exactly.
All those 5 categories are super super cool. I want to ask you, often people kind of get confused between conflict and disagreement, and they might use both of them interchangeably at times, right? How do
Yeah.
you distinguish between like a healthy disagreement and a conflict that requires intervention? So let's take
So
the
I
same hockey example, maybe.
Sure. I would look at the impact of what the difference of opinion, like I would look at the impact of the difference of opinion. So if you and I are able, let's say we're colleagues or coworkers and we're able to work together even though we have that difference of opinion, then I would say that's in some ways a healthy conflict. It is what it is. It's a human nature type thing, and that doesn't necessarily need any intervention. If we're still functional, we're still able to do our jobs, we're still able to you know chat and work together and collaborate. When we need professional intervention in particular is when things have really escalated and it's having a negative impact on the people and those around them, and the business and kind of the ecosystem they're operating in. So if you and I were so dug into our rivalry that we couldn't work together, we couldn't even look at each other, and on game days it was just a matter of time before we started yelling at each other, then I would say actually we need to have a sit down and potentially deal with that if the two of us couldn't resolve it amongst ourselves. So I look at the impact. I look at whether people are still functional. Often when people come to see me because they're in a conflict with somebody else, or they're having a hard time because of business to business conflict, for example, it's really impacting their life. And so they're walking around with a bundle of anxiety, inside them. They're not able to think straight. They're not functioning as well. Maybe their other relationships are starting to struggle. In businesses, I start to look at things like time. Are they losing time because of the conflict? There's a study out there, which I think came out last year, which said that on average, workers lose over 4 hours a week because of conflict. And so, as a lawyer who used to bill my time, I could very easily put that into dollars. And so, if we're looking at like, wow, I'm losing 4 hours of billable time a week because I'm getting riled up every time someone disagrees with me, that's when we start saying, okay, maybe we need to bring somebody in to help you deal with that.
So there's so many things here, and I can't wrap up my brain, focused on like, which direction I want to lead this conversation to, because you're kind of
Okay.
answering everything people want to hear about conflict in general. Let me ask you, at what point do you think, no, let me rephrase that. When do you think a situation is going to go out of hand? Are there ways to identify this so that we can take preventive measures before things go, really escalate, go out of hand, before it reaches a point that we can't even interact with one another without hating one another? Are there Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there are sort of signs. And one of the things that we would look at is how you can predict that in yourself. So I have some physical tells when something has set me off, and I become what psychologists might say emotionally dysregulated. I would just simply say my nervous system gets set off or gets activated. So for me, I'll either feel like the blood has rushed from my head to my toes, or I'll feel like my face gets really hot, and I'll kind of describe it as my blood boiling. So I've learned that when that happens with me, that's a sign that potentially things could escalate, or I'm going to not be responding in the way I want to. I might not have a deliberate response. So that's one thing, is having people understand for themselves what that looks like for them, so that they can pull the plug and say, actually, I need to take a pause, I need to excuse myself, or I need to calm myself down. For interpersonal relationships, what I tell people is I say, read the room. Because a lot of the times the energy is there. You can pick up on it when tension hits. You just know, like, we sense it as human beings. We're very attuned to that kind of thing. And actually, we can mirror each other's emotions. I can't remember what the term is called, but actually, there's a term called emotional contagion, which means emotions are contagious. So if you're starting to feel differently in a room, that might be a sign that, okay, things have shifted and we need to pause and just check in with everybody and see what's happened. The other thing I would say from a more macro perspective, when we're looking at teams or communities, people functioning, is you'll see people start grumbling, you'll hear people start complaining. You might have someone who usually is very talkative and then they go quiet. You might start to see cliques form, like when we see us versus them, and categories of people. As soon as you start categorizing people, studies have shown that that can actually breed conflict. So there are certain signs that we can look for early on that suggest that we need to investigate and see what's happening. But every single situation is going to be different. And when we're in a relationship with somebody, partner or otherwise, it's really good to notice that about your partner. Like my husband will know that I will go quiet sometimes when my conflict threshold has been breached. I go quiet. I kind of shut down a little bit because I want to think about it. And then because he knows me well, he would check in and say, okay, what's going on? So it's there's no one size fits all answer to that, but there are certain signs that have been shown to at least give an indication that conflict is there. Another one I should say is gossip. When people are gossiping, whether you're dealing with the workplace and people are gossiping amongst themselves at work, or they're gossiping to other people, that's another symptom that there's a conflict that's happening or already brewing.
I really like this. I'm gonna add this to my vocabulary. My conflict threshold has been reached. I'm gonna add this. I'm
Yeah.
gonna make the best out of it. I want to ask you, Susanna, is there a possibility that a conflict can never be resolved, or it has reached a point that a resolution can't really help? And do you advise people not to communicate further or have that distance? You know how people advise that remove toxic people from relationship. You don't need to engage with them, stuff like that. What do you think?
What a great question. I think that so there's this wonderful framework out there by a guy named Bill Eddy, Eddy, and his work is just fantastic. And he talks about high conflict personalities. And there's four markers of a high conflict personality. And I may mess this up because I don't necessarily have this memorized, but from my recollection, we're dealing with people who everything is either all good or all bad. There's a lot of all or nothing thinking. Nothing is ever their fault, and they'll respond to requests for accountability by throwing it back on you and sort of being abusive towards you. They don't tend to be very emotionally regulated. They're not in control of their emotions, and their responses tend to be quite extreme. And so, they might kind of bite your head off for saying no, you're not going to have dinner with them that night, that type of thing. So I work amongst other people that come to me because I do the crisis management side and then the life coaching. I work a lot with women who've been in relationships with people who I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to diagnose them as being narcissistic, but I certainly have my suspicions that there's something going on there and that there's just an unhealthy dynamic. And so I would never say to somebody, because coaches don't do this, coaches don't give advice. I would never say, you need to cut off contact with this person. I would help them come to a decision about that for themselves. But of course, if physical safety is a concern, that needs to be addressed. If the person is just showing you this pattern of behavior and you've tried to address it with them and they're just not coming to the table, I get all of my clients to tell me what their minimum non negotiables are in every relationship. Like, I want to, so for me, respect is very important. Honesty is very important. Integrity is very important. So if somebody is continuously behaving towards me in a way that makes me feel sad or makes me feel hurt or makes me angry, and even though I've brought it to their attention and I've asked them to stop, and they're not even wanting to come to talk to me about it to see if we can collaborate, then that's probably somebody that I'm not going to go out of my way to spend time with. There are Bill Eddy will talk about avoiding people like that completely, because what he says is that when you're dealing with people who are high conflict, they thrive on the conflict. And so one of the best things to do is to spot them and potentially avoid them. My concern with saying anything, painting everybody with the same brush, is that sometimes people misdiagnose each other. TikTok, we're all diagnosing each other with things. Sometimes we don't have the full picture. So I tend to say, let's look at the situation. Let's look at what you've tried. Let's look at the impact it's having on you. And then I help my clients make the decision that's best for them. And sometimes, Jason, you're right. Sometimes it is severing contact and just saying, I'm not going to add fuel to this fire anymore. But every situation is different.
I love what you said about what's your minimum non-negotiable. Again, I'm going to include this in my vocabulary. So this is
That's not mine. That's somebody else's. That I heard that from somebody else, but I think it's brilliant. So I'm happy to share with you.
and people who are listening down in the listening lounge, who are hearing us live, please give Susannah a thumbs up, because I think she's sharing some really kick-ass knowledge about conflict, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it, being here, because I'm learning and grasping so much information, and I think it's gonna be helpful to a lot of individuals. So thank you so much
Oh,
for
thank
the
you.
kindness, your love, and support. It really means a lot. Let's actually take a quick break before we get into the second segment of this interview, where we speak about reputation management. Okay, so we will be back. I want to give a quick shout out to my sponsor for sponsoring this episode. Thank you so much, Carla.
Are you a professional speaker who's frustrated because you're not getting paid for the value you deliver? If so, the Get Paid from the Stage program was created for you. During our 6 weeks together, you will build the framework for your speaker business. You'll create an amazing speaker package that event organizers are going to take notice of. And I will walk you through the sweet spot for pricing and many other things that are going to make you referable so that you can earn the high dollar value that I know you're delivering. Be sure to sign up soon. Our next cohort begins March 2nd, and it's limited to no more than 10 people. Send me a note and let me know that you heard about the program from Jason's podcast to get your free 1-hour consultation with me at no extra charge. I can't wait to see you get paid from the stage.
So that's Carla Howard. She's a very distinguished speaker. She knows her stuff. She's a strategic change consultant, a professional speaker, and a dream enabler. She was also a guest on my podcast. I think last season. And please check out this cohort she's referring to, Get Paid from Stage. It's a 6-week thing, which is going to kick off March 2nd, 2024. If you're listening to us live, you should be able to find this on the event notes. If you're listening to the replay version of it, you should be able to find it on the show notes. So let's actually get down, let's go back to our interview. And I'm going to do a part two right now, wherein we speak about reputation management. So let's understand this. So, Susannah, to provide clarity to our listeners listening to us live or on replay, how do you define reputation management, especially today's interconnected and digital world?
This is a great question. And actually, funny enough, I hadn't thought about it before you asked me, because it was just always one of those things that I just had a clear picture in my brain but never put words to. So when I thought about it, I thought about reputation management is essentially you managing your relationship with a bunch of different people. It's so our interpersonal relationships are one to one. Our reputation is our one to many. It's the brand that we put out there. It is what people say about us when we're not in the room. It is that invisible currency that will either cause somebody to come and work with us or engage with us or steer clear. So when I'm looking at managing that reputation, I'm looking at managing the optics of a situation. I'm looking at managing the way people are going to perceive my actions when I might not have the opportunity to talk to them face to face or one to one.
So this is an invisible currency which is out there about you. That is such an incredible answer, Susannah. Thank you so much for explaining this. So that's what reputation management is all about. So let's deep dive into this further. Would you mind helping us understand some key factors or elements that can contribute to an individual or a brand's reputation, and how have these factors evolved with the rise of social media?
So one of the ways I conceptualize this in my head is I think about reputation as being about trust. And a lot of us want to do business or interact with people or brands that we can trust. And the Harvard Business Review actually had an article about trust and three things that generate trust between people. The first thing they talk about is common ground, like likability. I like you as a human, you like me as a human, or I like what that business stands for, I like what they do in the world, and kind of that common values, that type of thing. That can really help with reputation. The second thing is reliability. Are you going to do what you say you're going to do? And one of the things that I often tell my clients is I say, managing expectations from the get go when you're working with businesses. I help a lot of CEOs and solopreneurs and entrepreneurs. And I talk about managing their clients' expectations, because that helps keep everybody happy. It helps keep everybody feeling safe in that relationship. And when there is a say do gap, when there's a gap between what you've said you're going to do and what you actually do, I like to get ahead of that and make sure that people understand that I've not just forgotten about them, that there's a good reason for that. So we've got likability, we have reliability, and then people also need to trust your judgment and your expertise and your vision. They need to trust that you can execute what you say you're going to do. And that doesn't with some celebrities, for example, they need to trust that what you're putting out there is actually the truth, that it's not just some kind of act, or it's not performative, or that kind of thing. So I think those three things, when I was reflecting on your question, Jason, those were the three things that I really thought, you know what, that is really, really important, is just having those three things in place. And then the rest of it, we can kind of build from there.
Absolutely. Likability, reliability, and you said judgment. So these are interesting
Yeah.
things which you said, and we would deep dive further. Let's could you help me understand, as well as my listeners understand, some challenges businesses face when it comes to managing their reputation, and how are these challenges manifesting?
Well, one of the things that I see quite often is with online reviews and online discussions about businesses. So, businesses will often come to me because they've got somebody who's initiated a smear campaign against them online. And so, a lot of people are afraid of bad Google reviews. And a lot of times, what I've noticed and what businesses will report to me is they'll say, there's this terrible Reddit thread about me, for example, or somebody left a nasty Google review, and now suddenly I'm losing clients and I don't really know what to do about that. Or they notice a shift in the way that people are responding to them. And so in the age of social media, where it's actually quite easy to make your opinions known to a lot of people about a business, businesses, I think, have to be more aware of the fact that their reputations are fragile and that they do need to be protected. And I also think they need to be aware of when, or they need to have some decision making in place about when they're going to respond to some of these negative things that may show up online versus when they shouldn't engage with it.
That is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, Susanna. While I was actually writing those questions for you for this interview, I also stumbled upon a question which I wanted to ask personally you. It's about reputation crisis. I'm just trying to combine the conflict part and the reputation, merging both of them together. When do you
Yeah.
think a reputation crisis or a reputation conflict would occur? And what strategies would you recommend to minimize that damage?
So, one of the most obvious ones that comes to mind is cancel culture. And I can think of several different celebrities who've been canceled in the not so distant past. And that's one thing that it's just, if there's one sign that your reputation is in crisis, it's being canceled. So that's one of the ways that it can certainly show up. Another way that it shows up for people is they discover that their professional reputations have been tarnished. And so for some people, they'll come to me and they'll say, I'm here because the whole town is talking about me. Suddenly nobody will speak to me to my face. Suddenly invitations are drying up. They're not getting invited to the same meetings or events that they would have been invited to. I've already talked about losing clients. There's lots of little signs that can show that the reputation has been a problem or is a problem for somebody. Often they'll feel a bit like a social pariah. They will walk into a room, they'll immediately feel uncomfortable. They might feel like everybody's looking at them and talking about them. And so they can pick up on a shift in that energy. Sometimes it's actually brought to their attention that something they've done or a rumor about them is making the rounds, and this can be very troubling. There is a book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed. I think that's what it's called. It's something like that. And they talk about the pain that comes with being publicly humiliated and being publicly degraded or devalued. And they actually said that at one point, I think it was actually in the States, or there was some in history at some point, one of the societies or one of the cultures actually stopped with the public humiliation, putting people in, I think they call them the stocks. Do you know those wooden contraptions that have holes for your hands and your head? And you see it in like medieval movies and stuff like that. And the person sort of stands in the village square and they're stuck there. And it's sort of a public declaration that they've done something wrong. And certain societies actually stopped doing that because it was too cruel. So that pain of that public embarrassment, that public humiliation, feeling like people are making judgments about you before you've even had a chance to say hello, that's very, very real. And often that's a sign, people will come to me and they're just feeling that intense emotional pain. It actually, it makes me a little bit myself emotional thinking about it because it is just so toxic and so damaging.
Now, as you're saying this, we are addressing and focusing on the negative side of cancel culture. And I was thinking to myself, do you think, cancel culture, and if this happens to an individual, okay, I think it can lead to a lot of increased attention. Do you think that can lead them with an opportunity to maybe improve their image over the course of time because of that attention?
I think I think the opportunity is always there, and I think that there's stuff that you can learn from every single situation. I try to stay away from thinking that things are all good or all bad. I've learned that generally speaking is not the case. That nothing's really truly black or white. There's usually a shade of gray at play. So I think there's always that opportunity that's there. The question is whether or not it's well managed. And I think what people want to see with cancel culture in particular is for the person who's being canceled, they want to see that they want to know whether or not the person agrees they've done anything wrong, number one. If they have done something wrong, they want to see some kind of apology and then some kind of repair happening. And I think it comes down to justice and people wanting to right what they think is wrong. The problem with cancel culture in particular is that it's based on the court of public opinion. And coming at this from my legal lens, had to jump through so many hoops to get evidence put before the court. Like there's certain things you have to be able to prove in order to introduce evidence in a trial. And there's lots of things that judges will consider, and they'll weigh certain things, they'll weigh opinions, and they really go to painstaking lengths to make decisions in these conflicts and to make sure that they're basing their decision on facts and not stuff that hasn't been substantiated. And the court of public opinion doesn't do that. So, what I've seen happen, and it goes back to that polarization, is that people are very, very quick to jump to conclusions. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Some of the information that we see that maybe isn't quite fake news or misinformation isn't as compelling or well founded as other pieces of information. So the court of public opinion is really not that reliable and can be quite easily influenced. So what I want to see if somebody's being canceled is, typically speaking, what people want is they want to know the person, whether or not they agree they've done something wrong. They want to see a good apology, a genuine apology. They want to see repairs being made, and they want to see that the person is willing to grow and learn. And I think if somebody is willing to grow and learn and make things right and, engage in that reconciliation and make those repairs, I actually think cancel culture is really harmful because it doesn't give someone that opportunity.
I agree with you completely because I have seen people getting shunned out of social media completely, not having a voice, not having the opportunity to resolve those conflicts or argument, or even presenting their points. Like,
Yes.
so I think the best way to handle cancel culture is to give them the opportunity to, to highlight their part of the
Mhm.
story and maybe then collectively coming to a decision. But I don't think that's being done nowadays with cancel culture,
No.
So
I
I
don't I don't think so either. But I do think there are times when, if people aren't willing to show I mean, there are times when things might not be black or white, but they're quite clear. And there are times when people have done wrong and they do need, justice does need to come into it. My personal view is that I think we should leave that to hopefully well-functioning justice systems rather than trying to take matters into our own hands without all of the facts.
So as a crisis management coach, Susanna, and so I'm not planning this question, I'm just thinking it loud. Do you think
Okay.
cancel culture is really impacting the freedom of speech and discouraging an open dialogue, according to you? What do you think?
Uh, that is a great question. I do, actually. I do think that. I think that so I think freedom of speech is so incredibly important, and history has taught us that. I think certainly in Canada there are limits to your freedom of speech, and typically speaking those limits are if you're inciting violence or if you're inciting hate. I think that when we get into a situation where people are afraid to talk about how they feel, when they're afraid to share their perspective because everybody else is so primed to cancel them, or they're primed to think that they're a bad person, there's this fundamental attribution error. It's a psychological concept, which is basically when you confuse their actions with the type of person they are. And so I think when people are afraid to express themselves, when they're afraid to speak, when they don't have that freedom of speech, that becomes very concerning in a society. And that's where it's a road that is a problem, because when you have people who are bottling up their emotions, and we're talking about oppression and that type of thing, that's when things can become a little bit unstable, and it can be really concerning, not just from a psychological standpoint, but just from a societal standpoint as well. So one of my hopes for the world, not to get cheesy or existential on you, is that we can all actually talk about our differences and try to work together to find that common ground and live in harmony and peace. As cheesy as that sounds, I think that has become more important now than ever. But what the research says about that is that you can't go about that by preaching to people and saying, you're wrong and I'm right. There's actually a way to have the conversation so that people maintain their sense of agency. They maintain kind of that sense of that they're in control of their own destiny. And that, I think, is important. And I would love to see us as a human race be able to do that, because I think there's a lot of really good people there. I think there's a lot of really good perspectives that maybe need to be shared that people aren't sharing because they're afraid of being canceled.
Absolutely. And I think that was an incredible answer. Thank you so much for doing that, Susannah. Sharing your
Okay.
perspective and point of view on this. People who are actually listening down in the audience, if you are interested in coming up and asking Susannah questions about reputation or conflict in general, or anything which you found interesting, maybe something about cancel culture, you're welcome to raise your hand and come up. Oh, Leslie is the first one. If anybody else who is listening who is interested to come up, please take advantage of this conversation we are having, because I think this is a dope and a kick-ass conversation we are having. I'm learning quite a lot, so I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So we have
Me too.
Leslie. We have Leslie. Thank you so much, Leslie. I'm glad you were able to spare some time. So, do you have a question, or would you like to contribute to this conversation?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me up. And yes, I do. Well, I'm reflecting on the fact that as a board certified practitioner in functional health, when I am on weekly meetings with fellow practitioners, just reviewing client case studies, we get a handful of us that we have our voice on social media trying to create awareness for the brain gut health and all the junk that we're eating in society. However, we have to navigate cautiously because during COVID, we had to really delicately navigate through using certain terminology and words. And in our lectures virtually, a lot of people were shut down. Their accounts were closed. So we're navigating as the New York Times, and I keep going back to it, as the Wild West. Even to that point, our voices were shut down. So we're always trying to figure out a way to convey all of the new research, and just try to get our voices out. And I find that really, really interesting. So I was just wondering if you have cases with people that are in the functional health or practitioners that kind of are on the edge of that research that's out there that, a lot of the big pharmas don't want people to know about.
So what a great question. Thank you, Leslie. I don't necessarily have cases with people in functional health specifically. I do work a lot with healthcare providers, and part of that is just my background and training. I did health sciences as my undergrad, and I thought it was just so interesting. And so I do tend to attract a lot of health providers. And I will say that there has been, even actually yesterday, there was a decision that was released here in Canada about whether or not regulated professionals could express their views without their regulating body stepping in and saying, no, you can't say this, and no, yes, you can say this. And if I've understood correctly, I think the court actually came down and said the regulatory body can actually, I don't want, limit what people can say. And that was certainly something that we saw in the pandemic as well. And I'm seeing it now with people who are parts of these regulatory bodies, board certification. I'm assuming it's similar, where, in your line of work, where they are hesitant to speak out on social media about various issues, or they actually get in trouble for it. So I am seeing that, and I think the word that came to mind as you were talking, Leslie, is censorship. And it's, I think when people are feeling censored, that's a problem. And what I would personally love to see is I would love to see more education so that people can make their own decisions. Or on the flip side, I would like to see some trust in professionals who we can put our faith in to interpret this for us. So something that we saw a lot in the pandemic was people who were interpreting medical studies on their own, and they didn't have the background to do it, and so they would jump to their own conclusions, and it was a very tricky thing to navigate. And so what I felt would have been really, really helpful, and sometimes was there and sometimes it wasn't, was somebody to help us make sense of that. Because the layperson, like what you're seeing, I think, and what you're describing is competition to get people's attention and to win hearts and minds. And I think when we start, I think it's good to have a framework to make sure that the information that we're getting is valid. I also think that it's important that we have access to all of the information and that people aren't being kept quiet by things like big pharma.
Yeah, I love that, and we need more of you out there. When I was in the corporate world 25 years ago and came into a position as an assistant in a product development, I was hired through the president of the company, and unbeknownst to me, people were thinking, "Wow, she didn't go through the set protocols. Is this his mistress?" I was also a threat to the head product manager who I was an assistant to because I wanted to learn and thrive. And the president, had us in a group meeting and said, "Where is Leslie? She should be here. She has to learn this." But they didn't have anything like that years ago, or I wasn't aware of it. So
Mhm.
kudos to you, and I'm so proud of what you're doing. And we need to have a voice, and we need someone like your services to help us out.
Oh, thank you, Leslie. I really appreciate the comment.
Absolutely. There is Leslie. Please continue to be on stage. I have a question which is boiling up in my head because you brought the word censorship. So, Susanna, I'd like to, explore that a bit more. Do you think censorship, and based on your personal and professional experience, is it a necessary tool, according to you, to maintain social order, or do you think it infringes on individuals' freedom of expression?
That's a good question. That uh I think every single this I'm going to give the most annoying law answer to this, and I should be clear, I'm not giving legal advice, but the lawyer answer in me is it depends. It depends on whether the information that's being censored is dangerous, whether it incites hatred. We've all basically engaged in this invisible contract with each other in society, and we have laws that try to explain what that is so that we all are, playing on this board game with the same set of rules. And I think what we want to do is, I think it's a matter of working backwards from what we want. And, we want social order. We want people to feel safe. We want people to be able to thrive, and we want us all to be able to work together. How we go about doing that, I don't know if censorship is always the answer. I don't think it is always the answer, but I think that I think we need to work backwards from what we're trying to achieve, and we need to use our judgment and our common sense, and really make sure that we are, in my head, striking that very fine balance between the rights of the individual and the rights of society.
That's a lovely answer, Susanna. Do you think social media should have control over whom they are banning and why they are banning?
I think I actually, you're asking me some great questions. These weren't necessarily planned.
I didn't plan
I
it. Like,
think
it's just coming out of the conversation we are having. I'm just
yeah.
thinking it loud. Okay. I hope I'm not putting you into the
No, no,
spot.
no, not at all. This is great. My personal view, and again, this is personal, is that there is, with great power comes great responsibility. Was that Superman? I think that's Superman that I just quote. Maybe it's Spider-Man that I quoted. Um, and I think that social media companies in particular are very powerful. And I think that they do I do think they should be, from a corporate social responsibility standpoint, I do think they should be being quite cognizant of what information is allowed to be disseminated on their platforms. I think that's something that just like I said, from the corporate social responsibility standpoint, that they should be doing. But and again, it comes back to that balance of the rights of the person and kind of the ethics of like what's right for the individual versus what's right for society. And I think where something is very clearly not true and could potentially cause harm, um, then sure, I would be supportive of that not being spread around. Uh, but where it gets tricky is the question of who gets to make that decision. And some people would say, well, I should be allowed to decide for myself whether I should be allowed to use my own critical thinking. And to go back to the example of the pandemic, I didn't want to do my own critical thinking about healthcare decisions I was supposed to make in that moment. I wanted to be able to rely on people who had gone through years and years and years of school to learn how to interpret these studies and learn how to advise people on their health decisions. And I think it's a matter of, again, finding that balance of trust in society versus every man for himself. There has to be a balance.
I could not agree more. There has to be a balance to keep, things in order to have that balance. So this is just super cool. I really like the way how we are going ahead with this conversation. I remember you posting something over Instagram, I suppose, and there was this quote, and I would like you to just address and expand on this. So the quote stated that it becomes infinitely easier to change what other people think of you. I mean, I'm just saying this out of keeping reputation part in mind. So it
Yeah,
becomes
yeah.
it becomes infinitely easier to change what other people think of you once you start to change what you think about yourself. Let's hear from you. Let's expand on that.
Yeah. I loved that. So I that was inspired by some client conversations that I've had over the past couple of weeks, and I like to take lessons that I learn from talking to people, because I think one of the best qualities a coach can have is curiosity and that open-mindedness and being able to learn. And something that I noticed through clients I've worked with for a long time was that one of the ways that we have effectively repaired their reputation is we've actually dealt with some of the inner work that comes with feeling like you're excluded, feeling like you're on the outside, and kind of helping the person come to terms with that and really accept themselves. And what I've noticed happens, or what I've learned, is that when people feel like they're the victim, when they feel like they're a social pariah, or when they feel like they have enemies with somebody, first of all, they'll give off that energy. I think we all give off an energy, whether or not we know it. And because humans are very perceptive and, subconsciously will pick up on each other's emotions, I think your energy can very much change a dynamic between you and somebody else. So that's one thing. And so when you change, in order to change your energy, often we have to change how we're feeling about ourselves and how we're feeling about the situation. And people will take their cue from you. So if you're feeling like there's a good reason why you're the social pariah, if you've done something wrong and you're carrying that shame with you, people will pick up on that. But when you fix that shame, or when you kind of, like I said, come to terms with it, you'll carry yourself differently and people will respond accordingly. And so when I work backwards with my clients who need reputation management, I'll say, okay, I'll ask those questions that I was saying earlier. Like, what do you want people to say about you? Who do you want to be in the world? Like, we get a bit existential, because what we want to do is we want to have them acting the way they want to be perceived. And, we've, in the past, when I've worked with people on this, one of the things that we always come back to is I say, when in doubt, do the thing that's good, do the thing that's good for humanity, like do good for other people, help somebody. And that, typically speaking, if it's a matter of I could do one thing that isn't very helpful or do something else that is super helpful, you're going to get a lot farther in terms of your reputation if you're helping and you're putting that goodness out into the world. And so I think it's a matter of thinking good thoughts about yourself and recognizing what you bring to the table, accepting what your limitations are, realizing that's okay. And then also putting that good energy out into the world as well.
That is amazing. That is very, very positive, Susanna. And I want to ask you another question. And while I do that, I want to let the listeners know who are listening to us live. If you are still interested in coming up, please raise your hand. You're welcome to ask questions to Susanna. We would be moving to the rapid fire rounds. We would not have Q&A. So if you're interested, please raise your hand and I would be happy to bring you up. My question is that I kind of asked this question to all my guests who I have interviewed on my show. Now, what is that one thing you want to be remembered for? What kind of a legacy you want to leave behind?
Um, I love the quote about, I think it was Maya Angelou who said it, about how people won't necessarily remember what you said or did, but they will remember how you make them feel. And I would love to be remembered as somebody who made other people feel good, somebody who helped ease suffering. I don't want to be dramatic, but when people are in crisis, when they're feeling like there's a crisis, that is suffering. That's not pleasant. And when you feel like your reputation has been damaged, often there's a humiliation that goes along with that. There's that devaluing, there's that ostracized feeling, that othered feeling that goes with that, which is very painful. So I would love to be remembered as somebody who helped other people work through that and come out the other side of that. Ultimately, I'm a sort of, I believe that you can do a lot of good by doing small good things. I don't necessarily need to be world famous, but I would love to just leave people better off than how I found them if I can.
Absolutely. That is an amazing answer. Thank you so much for sharing that. Since we don't have people coming up on stage, let's actually do a rapid fire round. All right, so this is a section. I'm going to be asking you some funny questions, and we will ask one question
Okay.
to Leslie, since she's on stage. So let's hit it. So my first question is: if you had to choose a karaoke song to diffuse some of the tension, let's say you're in a conflict environment, and if you want to diffuse some of that tension going on, what song would you play, and why?
I would pick the Macarena because a lot of people in my generation know it, and we usually don't mind getting up and doing the action. So I think that would lighten the mood. That's my knee jerk response. I would love to have something that's more substantive and deep, but I think something that people can kind of think back to maybe their younger self when they were learning how to do the Macarena, and just kind of tap into that. At least here in Canada, I think a lot of people my age would know that dance. I think that would probably diffuse the tension.
Do you know just to make sure it's the same song? Do you know the opening lines or maybe the chorus of the song? I can't play
The
it
word,
because of
it's like
copyright. Uh-huh.
it's like a Macarena. It repeats over and over and over again. I think we can safely say the band was a one-hit wonder. Um, and oh my gosh, if I probably will misspell it. I think it's Macerena, maybe. I don't, oh my gosh, I would totally lose at the spelling
That's
bee
all
for
right.
this.
That's okay. I think I've heard this song. Unfortunately, guys, due to copyright issues, I can't play it because it does get released and removed from YouTube and Spotify and Apple and
Oh,
other
okay.
platforms. But you get the drill, right? You know the song.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think it's a lovely track. Okay. My next question. Okay, what is the funniest client conflict you have encountered? How did you handle it? And you don't need to mention the client name or anything. And
Um,
funny situation.
so sometimes it cracks me up, what people will fight about, and I will sometimes crack up when I hear people talking about what their kids will overhear, for example, so that, like, usually it's when people are coming to me, we're not fighting over trivial stuff, but what I do find funny is sometimes people will say, like, "My kid heard me on the phone," and then they the next day I was asking a rhetorical question about why someone did something, and then the kid responds with, "Because they're a fucking idiot, mommy." And I find those stories pretty funny when kids are repeating things that adults say. I've heard stories, and certainly when I was training as a lawyer, I did a little bit of family law because I kind of went around, and you learn different areas of law, and you hear stories about people fighting over like a teacup, for example, or in when estate litigation, people fighting over wills and fighting over something like a fridge. And you just think, why is this so important? So that can be really, really humorous. But I wouldn't say, to be honest, since I started doing this work, there isn't really like I wouldn't say someone's come to me with a really funny conflict. But what I will say is that sometimes when people are angry, they can inadvertently say things that are actually sort of funny. And I sometimes have to stifle a bit of a laugh because the way they're telling me the story is either so unfortunate that you're just like, I have no choice but to laugh. This is such an insane situation. And so sometimes that can sort of happen. I always look to add humor wherever I can. And so if someone, if I can add some humor, if I can say, wow, I bet that response helped, add a little bit of just jest and fun to the situation, I will, because that's generally speaking, I that's how I look at life is I'm always trying to see the humor in a situation.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Now, since Leslie was laughing, I am just curious, Leslie, did you encounter a situation with your children, something in the same lines as what Susannah said? I don't know if you're available. If you are, that would be cool to
Yep.
hear.
Well, I'm laughing because they used to call my husband, as a kid, Dirty Mouth Dowling. He was the youngest of five, and all the F bombs that went off with his wild brothers kind of trickled down to our kids. So a 3-year-old saying, "Mommy ass, mommy ass." We have them on DVDs. So I totally, with 3 sons, can resonate.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that, Leslie. All right, next question. Next question for you, and we will try to wrap things up as quickly as possible. If you had to choose like a pet sidekick for any of your conflict resolution adventures, I have not seen you with any pets so far in any of your videos. Okay, I'm not really sure if you have a pet, Susannah, but I'm just throwing it
I
out there.
do.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
guessing
I
it's a
have a
cat. I'm guessing it's a
It's
cat.
a dog,
Oh
actually, and you
shit.
know what? That tells me that I probably need to post another picture or video of her online because I maybe have been lacking, and so her name is Orla, and Orla is a Cocker Spaniel Poodle cross. We call them cockapoos here, and she has quite a little personality, and they sometimes say that dogs will take the personality of their owners, and so, she's a little bit like I wouldn't say I'm a diva, but Orla is definitely a diva, and Orla definitely has a swearing problem. So I remember one day I was sitting down at the table, and we were living in a different house at the time, and I was actually on a call with the court. We were doing remote court, so I was calling in on Zoom. And Orla was just a puppy and she lost her footing on the stairs. So, and I was facing the stairs at the table looking at my computer, and I could just see her coming down the stairs, and she was kind of making these like noises going down the stairs, and I thought, oh my god, she's totally swearing and she's totally taking after me. And so I will use Orla often if I need to give an example. If I'm teaching and I don't like to use people as examples, so I'll say, if it's Orla, she'll be my example. Or I'll sometimes show, she likes to sleep in very cute weird positions. And so I'll sometimes snap a picture and show a client or something, again, just to brighten the mood a little bit. Because even though bad things are happening, we can still, if we can find a reason to smile, then that's actually very, very helpful for us. So I'll use Orla for that. But she's awesome.
I would be really excited to see a picture of Orla when you post something. Definitely. It's going to go to my story.
Sure.
Definitely.
She's
So
really cute. Really cute.
I would love to see her. I have a common question for you and Leslie, and we will start with Leslie first. If conflict, and you've been hearing Leslie, we've been speaking about conflict, for the past 45 minutes to an hour now, I think. If conflict were an ice cream flavor, which flavor would best represent a heated argument, and which one would symbolize a peaceful resolution? I'll start off with Leslie.
Okay, certainly garlic ice cream. I know that's the garlic festival in California. And then the kumbaya would be strawberry.
All right, that's really nice, very creative. Okay, Susanna, I wanted to give you
Oh,
some
I
time to
love
think
that.
your answer. So, what would be yours?
Yeah. Oh, I think the garlic ice cream is such a good example because that is an ice cream I would never want to have. I love garlic, but I don't think I would want it in an ice cream. So I think something like that that's really unexpected, in an ice cream. I also would say like I don't particularly like fruit ice creams are not my favorite. So if you were to put like dried fruit in an ice cream, that would probably symbolize something that I would want to work through, conflict that I'd want to work through. Then
Good.
so the happy ice cream or kind of, come together group hug ice cream, I'm going to use a shout out because I'm pretty sure I'm from the East Coast of Canada. That's where I was born. And there's this ice cream called Moon Mist, which I'm pretty sure is just like a bubblegum flavored ice cream, but typically it's got like pale purple, pale yellow, maybe some pale blue and pale green. It's quite pretty, and certainly as a young girl, it was the prettiest ice cream and it was really delicious. And so that would be my group hug flavor, I think.
All right, so shout out to Susanna and Leslie for choosing the garlic ice cream. They have common. And you, Moon Mist. So that is super cool. I'm going to check it out. I have a challenge for people who are actually listening to this podcast, either on replay or live. If you make a garlic ice cream at home, tag me into that picture. I would definitely share it as a story, and that would be super cool. I really have never seen or heard anybody mentioning garlic ice cream. This is something really new and cool. So thank you, Susanna. I really appreciate that. I was wondering if something happens in the long run, and if you were to change your career once again, switching from a trial lawyer to a coach, and let's say that if time allows you to make another change, which one would you pivot to and why?
Good question. I feel like right now I'm doing my dream job. So that, it's a great question. I think if you could pay me to sit on a beach and just read books all day with my very favorite people around, I think that would be a pretty great job. But right now, and I know it sounds cheesy and everything, but I cannot think of a job I would rather do more than the one I'm doing right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. Who does not like beach reading, chilling, having mocktails or cocktails, and having some fun? That is
Exactly.
incredible. I want to actually give you the opportunity to promote yourself and your business. So, how can people reach out to you, Susanna? What kind of expertise do you think people can benefit from? And if there is any events or promotions you like to promote, feel free. You can do it right now.
So people, and we're on LinkedIn right now, so people can always reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. My website is susannahmargison.com. On Instagram, I am at Susannah the Coach. That's SUSANNAH the Coach. And I do individual coaching with people, one to one coaching. I'll also go in and do trainings for people. And basically, the first step is just to reach out to me with either a question or to book a consult. And then we go from there. And because every situation is different. So every situation gets a bespoke, uh, you know, solution from me for that. So that is how they can get in touch with me. At some point in the future, I will have more offerings from a group perspective. I do have a course actually that people could get. It's called the How to Deal with Assholes course, and I define asshole as somebody who makes you feel inferior without your consent. And it's 4 modules. It is full of like what some of my favorite tips and training. And again, I shouldn't say again because I feel like I may have not have said this in this podcast, but I tend to create products that I wish I had a few years ago. And that was a course I really should have taken before starting my law practice.
I like the way how you named it. What was that? How not to be an
How
asshole?
to deal with
How to
assholes.
deal with assholes. Okay.
I'm very imaginative, as you can tell, right? So when I was trying to name the course, I was like, it's how you deal with assholes. And that became the course name.
That is incredible. So guys, who are struggling with a pen and paper, and if you did not have things written down, do not worry. If you click on the event details and if you go through the event comments or the event description, you should be able to find Susanna's website, link to her socials as well listed. I would also have it on the show notes. please go through her website, book that call, take advantage of her expertise. I'm sure this specific episode has given you good clarity about conflict and reputation management. We spoke about censorship, we spoke about cancel culture, we spoke about her dog, and a lot of other interesting things. I think we had a fun conversation. I want to make a quick small announcement before we wrap up today's show. I'm going to be having a very exclusive episode with the one and only Matt Abrahams. He's very famous on LinkedIn. Matt Abrahams is an expert in communication with decades of experience as an educator, author. He's also a podcast host and a coach. He's a lecturer in organizational behavior at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. He teaches popular class in strategic communication and effective virtual presenting. I think this interview is scheduled on Feb 14th, right on Valentine's Day. Do check it out. I also want to give you a heads up on next week episode. It's empowering women by bridging the investment gap through brand design with PIC. You should be able to find the event details on my show notes or the featured section of my profile, LinkedIn profile. So stay tuned. We do this show every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you want to be a guest, please join the waitlist. DM me, and I should be able to add you to the list. If you want to receive updates of the shows which I do every week, who is my guest, what is the topic we're going to be speaking about, send me a DM with subscribe and you're followed with your email address. I should be able to add you onto the list. Susannah, before we wrap up, once again, if you want to leave my listeners with one thing they can take away from this whole conversation we had, what would it be?
I would say just know that even if you're the kind of person who doesn't love confrontation, first of all, no one loves confrontation when the stakes are high enough for them. And also just know that being a human being is a totally awesome and cool thing. We are all human. None of us are perfect. And I really believe that no matter the situation, we can always work through it. So keep the faith, I would say.
Absolutely. Keep the faith. Thank you so much, Sean, Ashley, Jay, Tobias, Miguel, and Shell. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. And Leslie. Lovely Leslie also. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to us live. Take care of yourself. Stay in touch. And I hope you guys have a wonderful Wednesday and the rest of the day. Thank you.